What do we got here? Oh, you know, something good's gonna follow this. Buckle guy. Huh, let's take a look here. Hello, I'm Robert, and you're welcome here in my business shop. On today's episode of What's on My Workbench, we've got a package to open up here. I'm working on a couple of belts, and I've got them pretty far along, but recently I've had quite a few questions, most of them offline. What I mean by that, not in the comment section, but some of them have been around my stitching. So I want to talk a little bit about my stitching and how I got to that part. But before I do, let's open this up, see what I've got in here. We're going to mount a couple of buckles here that if what I ordered's in here, they're two-pronged buckles. And I've never shown mounting one of those before. And I know you can buy dies that will cut the belt blank, both ends of it, and create all of those holes. But I think really the majority of the people that watch my videos aren't doing it that way. They're going to lay them out like I'm going to and make the holes and mount the buckle. So let's get over here on the workbench. We'll do that, and then that'll just take a minute. Then we're going to talk a little bit about stitching and how I've gotten to the point that I am, and I'll just say it, and why I really don't talk a whole lot about my stitching. But let's get over here and we'll get started. All right, let's see what we've got in here. I haven't bought from Buckle Guy in a while. The buckle that we were looking for, I didn't find elsewhere, so I went to the Buckle Guy. And I don't have a problem buying from the Buckle Guy. And I usually keep a little bit of a list of items that I'm going to need, but aren't needed right away, so that I can reach the $100 minimum for free shipping. So I bought another roll of my Tiger Ritza in black here. I'm about done with that spool. And the gentleman I'm making these couple belts for, he wanted the antique brass buckles. And so I got two of them because he's got two belts, but I felt that one of the colors may look better with the nickel. So we get ready to mount it. I'll show you with both of them. I'd like to see what you think as well. And then I've been intending to buy some of these really just for inventory, but these are what Buckle Guy sells as mini Chicago screws. So they're quite a bit smaller than the traditional Chicago screw. Just for a point of reference, that's the head on a Chicago screw, and here's the head on the mini. So they're considerably smaller. And I have had a few places where I wanted to use a Chicago screw, but I thought it was too large. So I went ahead while I was there to help me reach my minimum, is I bought the 1/4 inch and the 3/16 inch, and I bought them in the matte nickel finish, just for inventory. These are the two belts that I made for him. And while I was working on this, I was thinking about the stitching, because obviously when you're doing a contrast, white on blue, white on brown, if your stitches aren't in really good order, it's going to draw attention to it. And maybe I'm over dramatic with that. I would notice it. Leather workers would notice it. Maybe just a lay person that doesn't do leather work, maybe they're not that critical. But it really can stand out and look different. And we'll talk more about that when I get further along here. So let me lay out and install these buckles. So here are the two buckle options. The gentleman I'm making the belt for asked for the antique brass. I don't think it looks horrible, but I just think this looks so much better with the blue. This looks good over here. You could put this on here as well. I think it works fine, but he liked the antique brass. So this is the antique brass with the mahogany. And this is the gloss nickel with the blue. And this is that blue leather from Montana Leather. And he wanted to do something a little bit different. So I laid out, he didn't want the whole pattern of the diamonds that I've done. But we talked first about just doing conchos. And then he got the idea, and I've made a sample for him. But these are the diamonds set in a concho style every 5 inches here on this belt. And that's both belts made the same way. So tell me which one you think looks better on the blue. I'm going to be making it with this, but let me know what you think, if you think that the antique brass would look better than the nickel. And we looked for the matte nickel, but the buckle guy was out of inventory on the matte nickel finish on this, so we're going with this finish here. And I set my buckles in 3.5 inches from the end, so I'm just going to put a little bit of a mark here at the 3.5 inch mark. And then I use the calipers. It's probably fairly easy this close to the thread to get it parallel. Out here in the middle, it's pretty easy to get it twisted a little bit one way or the other. But here, it's probably easy enough. But I find that if I use my wing dividers and create a parallel line here, then it helps me to get this placed correct. I'm just going to eyeball, make sure this looks like it's going to be in the right spot, and it does. And I want to make sure I get this set, both of these the same, so you don't end up with a different starting spot on both sides of this fold over. And typically I end up using a 1.5 inch bag punch, but I'm eyeballing whether I want to use the 1 1/4 here. It probably doesn't make that much difference, but I'm taking a chunk of leather out of this. I did leave this slightly thicker than I normally do to make sure that I don't end up with an issue there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get this on that line, and I'm going to make a dimple here where that bag punch starts. Maybe there's an easier way. If there is, let me know how you like to do it. Maybe there's an easier way to do this. If there is, put it in the comments. I've only set a couple of these doubles, and it's been a long time ago since I've done the first one, so I don't remember exactly how I lined this out. Think I drove deep enough? Well, we'll go ahead and put in my marks for my adjustment holes here. This is a 36-inch belt. So we're going to be at 36, and then 2 smaller and 2 larger. So to test this, I'm going to line up the buckle, get it centered here, make sure these are, equally spaced on the buckle. I'm gonna put a little bit of a mark here, and then I will use my wing divider to find out what that spacing is. Centered. And I'll do that on each of these spots. Now they need to be the same here. You wouldn't want them staggered any. So to do that, I'm going to put it here and mark it. Okay, take one more look at this and see if that looks like it's going to be about right. Yeah, I think so. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish making my keeper, mounting that. You've seen me do that before. And I want to talk mainly about stitching. So we'll come back here in a little bit, and I want to talk about stitching. All right, so at the beginning of the video, I said that I wanted to talk about stitching. And I've got a couple things I want to talk to you about specifically about stitching. And some of it is the lack of information that I sometimes give on that. Now, maybe you haven't noticed that. Some people have asked me questions about my stitching. And that's one reason why I thought I would go ahead and put this video out and talk a little bit about the stitching, how I stitch the way I do, why I stitch, probably more important, why I stitch the way I do. I've had, not very many, but I had a couple people say, that's kind of an unusual way of stitching, but if it works for you, that's fine. Which I really kind of appreciate that approach, because a lot of the times it seems like people want to drive a stake in the ground and say, you're not doing that right, this is how you should do that. And that is one reason why I've really stayed away from telling you how to do stitching. And when I first started making videos, it was more of a just kind of follow along and see what I do. I really hope that my videos encourage you to try Leathercraft or chase whatever the hobby may be that you want to pursue in life. I hope there's a couple small planes flying around here. I hope it's not too distracting. But so when I first started stitching, I did not start here. Where I started was over here. Let me move the camera a little bit closer here. So I started my stitching right here on the workbench. Workbench has changed a little bit, but the way I started stitching would be I would start here at the tip and I would work my way down through the leather. And I would equal the two sides of the thread here, and I would start stitching. And I'm holding, obviously I'm holding this belt. It's just a short little piece of belt. And I would do my stitch, and I'd stick it underneath the edge of the mat here, and I would work my way down through here. And I've just got some scrap leather here. So I'm just going to go down through here. I'm going to do a few stitches here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. But this is how I started. I started without a stitching pony. This is not a sales speech on a stitching pony, but I'm one that I reach a point with questions where I feel like, you know, maybe people are like me and they want, you know, the deeper explanation or understanding of how you got where you ended up with your stitching. But this is how I would do the stitching, and I call this kind of a leapfrog method. I know there's several people out there that I've seen their videos, and this is how they stitch. And as you go down through here, the stitches, I think, look, you know, pretty good. Let me stitch here just for a few minutes, and then I'll come back and show you where we're at here, and then I'll show you the next phase of my stitching. All right, I'm gonna put a few stitches in over here. But while I'm doing that, you know, I used to, wife and I, we would get up on Saturday morning, turn on the TV, and we liked to watch Norm Abrams in the new Yankee workshop. And he would make a different project. And I can remember at times, I'd get done with it, and I would be frustrated. I'd be frustrated for a couple reasons. One, it seemed like he used about $3,000 worth of equipment to produce that candlestick holder. And, you know, I wanted examples of how I could do woodwork. I used to do woodwork quite a bit. That was a hobby I enjoyed, well, for the most part. As a perfectionist, it can really be a challenge. There's no stretch to fit like there is in leatherwork. You know, if you've got something miscut, then you start over. And I don't know how many projects I started and threw in the trash. Now, I found the hour-long Saturday morning video of Norm working in his shop. I found it entertaining, but I wanted to learn from it. And I tell you what, I just don't feel like I really learned a lot from it. And I can remember many times at the end of the show telling my wife it'd be nice if he would do, you know, like a project occasionally where he doesn't have a bunch of equipment. Now, I've got a bunch of equipment here in the shop. I'm sorry, I'll slow down. I'm talking kind of fast. But I've got quite a bit of equipment here in the shop, but I've shown you how you can do the work without a bunch of equipment. And, you know, some people are like, how do you pay for that? And believe it or not, I would say, I could probably pull out the files and do the math on it, but I would say that 95% of my revenue comes from making belts. So I make the other items, I think, in some ways to have content for my videos, but it gives other things in the booth to look at. Let me set this one aside, and I'm going to start another one over here. I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to show you my point of that. But let's pull off some more thread here. So I'll cover one of my questions I get really pretty regularly, and that is, how do I splice my thread when I'm making a belt? And I don't. I use one piece of thread for each side of the belt. And this belt here is a 38, so that means it's got 48 feet or 48 inches of length. And I used 3.5 times the length of that in thread. And I just go ahead and I do that as one piece. And it does slow you down a little bit at the beginning because you're pulling all that thread through those holes. Now, I'm not saying you need to do it that way. And that just kind of goes along with what I'm kind of trying to say here is I try not to tell you how you shouldn't do it. I just show you how I do it. If you decide you want to follow in my footsteps and do it that way, then you can. But the other thing that in my opinion, is that when you're watching me make a project, I'm making a bag, I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about how I sew those together because I figure that you've got your method of how you sew it together, and I don't want to tell you you're doing it wrong. Now, if you've got questions about how I do it or why I do it a certain way, then by all means, ask those questions. So this is loosely a gunslinger pattern, and I say loosely because I just took a scribe and just traced it out without getting my patterns out. But I'm going to sew one side of this doing the same leapfrog pattern. And you could say, well, what's the point of that? And you'll see here. Let me work down through here in the same leapfrog method. Come on. see I'm struggling a little bit here, lining this needle up here. And that's another thing that in the way that I do it, my stitching now, that helps to correct. So I'm going to go through here. I'm going to create this stitching pattern, and when I get a little bit done here, then I'll come back and we can talk about my stitching here. So just bear with me. I'll be right back. Well, I guess for you, it'll be just the next clip here. So now I'm here on the stitching pony, and I went and I grabbed one of my first gunslinger belts. Now I'll just show you here that by having something to hold it, it doesn't need to be this brand of stitching pony. It can be a stitching horse when you sit on, it can be a stitching pony, it can be a homemade clamp device, but I think that this makes, for one, the process much quicker, and when I put this needle in the front and I tip it a little bit, I then lay my needle against the back here, and it pops down into the hole there to come back the other way. So I'm not really even looking at the back side of my project here. It seems like it's easier just to find it. So this is quicker, and this way it allows me to replicate every stitch being the same. I know, I've gone from not talking about my stitching to, really dissecting it here quite a bit, but I want to show you, I guess, the reason why I do it the way that I do, and explain why I don't really spend a lot of time doing it. The other day I was on a Facebook site, and there was someone in there arguing that the person that was doing it wrong. Now, I would say they were doing it differently than I do it, but where is it for me to say that it's wrong or right? And I don't agree with that for other people to say that as well. Now, I've had very little of someone telling me that, I'm not doing the work right. I mean, I did have someone say that my work has no soul, which I don't know if I've ever shared that comment, but that was a comment that I got from someone. Now, I will say that it was written in another language and translated for me through YouTube so that I knew what the person wrote so I could respond, because I respond to every one of them. That one was a little bit difficult to respond to because my work has no soul. So let me show you here. I'm going to move the camera one more time. So I closed the garage door to get rid of some of that noise. Here is I can't remember if this is the first or the second one of my gunslinger belts that I made. And if you've seen me working, I've got another channel, and sometimes people see me working there and they'll notice this belt. But I wear this belt quite a bit as a work belt. And when I was so frustrated and upset with this belt when I got done, and I'm a Midwesterner, I have a hard time just throwing things away, but I want to show you, maybe you can see it now, but do you see how these stitches here, let me get a needle here to point, they're like in sets of 2, and depending on the direction you go, it's not as obvious. Along the edge, these stitches are in black. But if you look closely, you see some of that same, there's 2 here, and then this one sets over 2 there, sets over 2 there. It's the same thing, and for me, it's a problem, so I'm going to call it the same problem. It's the same problem. And when I was creating these belts and I started making the gunslinger pattern, I would get frustrated with it. A lot of times at that point I would get the belt ready for the hand sewing, and I would sit with my wife and watch TV in the evening and sew this, and this is done in my lap. Well, you can see, I always say that if you don't replicate your stitches the exact same way each time, then you won't have consistent stitching. This just proves it even more, that I was not replicating each stitch, but every set of 2 was the same, and that way it showed there. So I made several belts. This is the first one, and I had someone say, well, it looks handmade. I don't take that as a compliment. I understand what they were trying to say is it doesn't look like it's made by a machine. And maybe someone says, oh, I kind of like that, but it bothers me. So then here's another one that I made. This one, I was really focused on trying to eliminate the problems, making sure that when I pulled the thread through one at a time, that I would try to pull it in the right direction so that I wouldn't have that same pattern going. If you look, it's still there. It's not as consistent. There's some there, but it's not as bad. Part of it is that was on white on black, and this is white on brown, but this is quite a bit better. So here's my stitches from just now. I'm working in my lap, and it didn't do it quite as much, and it might be because this is some 16-ounce leather, and this other over here is like 11 ounces, but you can still see it somewhat here. But when I made this turn and I came back, to me, those stitches look, I think, very reasonably well. I have a hard time saying my stitches look good. I'm not fishing for compliments. But I think that looks a lot better. It definitely looks better than these stitches here. So I'm probably going to get critiqued some on making this video, but I had a couple of people ask me about my stitching, and the questions are really simple questions. How much thread do you use? How do you splice from one to the next? And this is my explanation of the reason why I didn't really cover my stitching in depth is I figure if you're a leather crafter, and I'm just trying to show you maybe some other projects to make, you already know how to stitch, or you're using a sewing machine. So I didn't feel like I needed to show someone how to stitch, but I've had enough questions, especially lately, about my stitching, about how I complete that I thought, you know what, I need to just come out and explain why I don't really go a lot into detail on my stitching. And it's because I've seen people out there, I think their stitching is fabulous. Once again, I'm not fishing for compliments. My stitching, I would say, has improved immensely over the number of belts. I was trying to figure, and I'll do a little bit of math on it, but the first 40 belts, I say, were all learning belts. But I'm somewhere in the, I'm going to say, 400 belt range at this point that I've made, and this is one of my first ones. And like I said, I keep it around, not as really a reminder of where I came from, it's because I can't just throw away a belt. So anyway, I'm circling around here. So the other thing that I hate to do is to make it sound like you have to buy a piece of equipment. You can make, I've seen people make some really nice stitching ponies. There's some out there that are by some of the larger companies that when you sit in a chair, it kind of tucks underneath one leg. And I think you can get one for, probably like $60. This one here, there's things about it that I don't like. I made a video when I first got this Dream Machine stitching pony, but there's things about it I don't like. So I'm not going to say it's the best one out there, and that's why really since that one video some time ago, I haven't really talked a lot about which one it is here because I don't want to make it look like a commercial towards something, especially if I'm not a firm believer in it myself. So I'm gonna wrap up here. Let me just, a couple things. So just clear, when I do my stitching, it's one piece of thread for each side here. And so if it's a 38-inch belt, which I'm dealing with a 48-inch strap, then 3.5 times is somewhere around 15 feet of thread. And that's what I do. I use that through there. And I really think that by the time I finish up, hide my stitches, start the next one, and continue down, it doesn't really take me that much longer. The stitching pony has really helped immensely on speeding up my stitching. because I'm working with both needles at a time. I'm not leapfrogging, refining my needles, and getting going from there. So I use most of the time Tiger Ritza thread. I use the John James needles. I like the thinner ones. The ones I actually have are sharp. A lot of people don't like the sharper ones, but they're thinner because I put both needles through at the same time. I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it. It's how I do it. And once again, you stitch the way that you like to do it. I've had a couple people make comments, I've tried it your way, I really don't like it that way. I got to that point trying to fix this, and now that I have it fixed, I guess I'm leery to veer off and find another way of doing it. And I've seen people critical of craftsmen that use stitching chisels to create the holes, saying you should just use a marking wheel and an awl and a needle. I'm not telling you that's the wrong way to do it. That is the traditional way to do it, but I like the way mine works, and I have people that like the belts that I make, and so I'm going to take that as the endorsement that I need there. So anyway, this kind of sounds like it's a gripe. It's not. I was just hesitant to come out and tell you how I stitch because I don't want you to think I'm telling you that you have to stitch that way. So I guess that's about it. I really do appreciate you taking time to be with me in the shop today. Please like, share, and subscribe. And can you check and make sure you're still subscribed? And more importantly, I hope you have a great day.